Out here, it's not only the amazing views, but the way time stretches out a little longer and how the breeze hits just right at the summit. With All Trails, you can discover nature's best with over 450,000 trails around the world. Download the free app today.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And I want to talk today about a period of time that kind of won't leave my thoughts at the moment. It's this period at the end of the Cold War. And as the Cold War ratcheted down, what it was, different foreign policy experts and policymakers and presidents and premiers on either side of the Cold War were really thinking. And we know, I've talked quite a bit about Gorbachev and the fact that Gorbachev wanted to deal with the structural problems of Russia, the fact that Russia's massive defense bill was only just being covered by the huge oil and gas reserves Russia had, and of course, there's a price slump in the mid 1980s, which means that a lot of growth is just negated. Russia had the Soviet Union had achieved something like 2.5% growth throughout the 1970s, which is quite good, really, given it's a decade worldwide of stagnation and inflation. Gorbachev also realised that his attempts to reform the Soviet economy and reform labor relations. They began with things like an anti-alcohol campaign and various kind of almost soft campaigns to try to alter the mentality of Russian workers who were he believed were lazy and undisciplined. Um, and this had been a view that had been prevalent since Stalin's time. You know that there was that labor had to be physically disciplined in some cases, and there were in sort of 1970s and 80s Russia and the rest of the Soviet Union significant problems with absenteeism and workplace accidents and poor productivity and workers just not caring. Which I don't know, maybe that's the default setting for all people that have to sell their labour. But on the other side of the Atlantic, obviously, Reagan's second term ends in 1988. And the he's replaced by his vice president, who is inaugurated in '89, and and George H.W. Bush, one of the very few vice presidents to be elected president, is someone who is a former CIA guy, a very kind of significant part of the Washington establishment, part of the kind of the Bush dynasty, of which produces obviously George W. a generation later, and somebody who understands the levers of power very well. Often viewed as this kind of rather grey, tepid figure, George George H.W. Bush was a guy who had really, by the end of the 1980s, bought into lots of kind of foreign policy wonk kind of ideas, the ideas around the project for a new American century, which kind of it emerges just as his son becomes president, and also these sort of kind of end of history, post history sort of ideas, which are these kind of Fukuyama kind of ideas. It's always worth mentioning on that, and I don't give enough over to this, that Fukuyama, often when he talked about the end of history, said this might even be a bad thing. There'll be no dynamism to ignite a human capacity and imagination. We'll be stuck in this kind of mono ideological state that might be terrifically boring for everybody. Well, turns out you didn't need to worry about that too much. Okay, so here I'm reading from Christina Spohr's post-wall, post-square history of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Tiananmen Square massacre and the world that emerges, or the world that emerges after 1989. She writes, Bush was confident that the US was actually entering a new era of ascendancy. The 21st century would be America's. The United States, Bush declared expansively in November 1988, just before his election, had set in motion the major changes underway in the world today. The growth of democracy, the spread of free enterprise, the creation of a world market in goods and ideas. For the foreseeable future, no other nation or group of nations will step forward and assume leadership. These themes of global change and American opportunity were developed more fully in his inaugural address on the 20th of January, looking out from the west front of the Capitol, across the Mall, to the Lincoln Memorial. After the customary invocations, of the deity and American history, Bush positioned himself on the cusp of a new era, as yet ill-defined. There are times when the future seems thick as fog. You sit and wait, hoping the mists will lift and reveal the right path. But this is a time when the future seems a door you can walk right through into a room called tomorrow. And Bush was ready to do so. We live in a peaceful, prosperous time, but we can make it better. For a new breeze is blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn. For in man's heart, if not in fact, the day of the dictator is over. The new president made no direct reference to the amazing transformations underway in the Soviet bloc and in communist China, but no one could have been in any doubt of what he meant. The totalitarian era is passing, its old ideas blown away like leaves from an ancient lifeless tree. Great nations of the world are moving towards democracy through the door to freedom. And America was the gatekeeper. We know what works, freedom works. We know what's right, freedom is right. The president set out the country's mission. America is never wholly herself unless she's engaged in high moral principle. We as a people have such a purpose today. It is to make kinder the face of the nation and gentler the face of the world. My friends, we have work to do. This was America's moment and he wanted to seize it. So, I mean, obviously, American presidents come out with this sort of rhetoric, or once every 4 years when they are elected and when they are inaugurated. Uh, but there was a certain idealism at the time, a certain naivety, a certain belief that an ideology, the iteration of capitalism that we were and currently are still living under, had triumphed over tyranny. George H.W. Bush had served in the Second World War, and he was of a generation that had lived through these world crises and during the Cold War, and no doubt was sincere in this outlook that the great ideological struggle of the 20th century was over. Obviously, as former deputy director of the CIA, he must have been well aware of the mercilessly brutal and cynical nature of that organization, and of the fact that in the pursuit of this mythical freedom, America had overthrown something approaching 60 governments since 1945, and had led all manner of coups, colonial imperial wars like Vietnam, and the undermining of sovereign countries, both through direct intervention, through subversion, and through simply using the levers of trade and diplomatic influence. So, of course, this is all kind of nonsense fairy tale rhetoric, and the only distinction between, or some of the few distinctions between the regimes that had collapsed and were transforming than America's, is the relative degree of free speech in America, and the fact that Americans get to decide which of the two parties, and they both united behind a singular ideology, will control things for the next at least 2 years, if not 4 years, through elections, and the fact that at this point in time, American capitalism was thriving. And one of the key objections that was put against Soviet communism is that, well, it doesn't really provide the material goods. This is perhaps less a reflection on communism itself, not that the state of communism is ever reached in Russia, in the Soviet Union, but it's more a reflection perhaps on state socialism, and it's a more a reflection on the fact that Russia itself is not a wealthy country. It is an economy that is far, far smaller than that of the USA, under any economic condition you like. Anyway, to continue. But where should the work begin? One might have expected that Bush would have opened the door towards Moscow. After Gorbachev's watershed speech at the UN, with the political transformation underway in Poland and Hungary, much of the world was fixated on the changes in the Soviet Union and the ferment in Eastern Europe. Yet, guided by the skepticism of Scowcroft, Brent Scowcroft, his national security advisor, and also keen to break from Reagan's cozy relations with Gorbachev, Bush's presidency began with a deliberate pause in superpower diplomacy. With few active agenda items left behind by the Reagan White House, Start One, the Arms Limitation Treaty, being the arms reduction talk, being the notable exception, Bush decided to order a set of studies re-examining existing policy and goals by region, with reviews of arms controls as well. Working out how to deal with Moscow was obviously our first priority, Scowcroft would later recall. But the reports would take a while to produce. Indeed, the National Security Council review on the Soviet Union did not land on the president's desk until the 14th of March. The reviews on Eastern and Western Europe focused on a closer union by 1992, with 2 weeks after that. So, really predicting the development of the European Union. Meanwhile, Bush had not only opened the China door, but strode right through it. Now, this is I think for me, the really interesting bit, the really relevant bit. On the 25th to the 26th of February, he met with the Communist Party in Beijing. It was the first time in American history that a new U.S. president had traveled to Asia before going to Europe.
Epic views, waterfall mists, summit sunsets. It's all better outside. And with All Trails, you can discover the best of nature with over 450,000 trails around the world. Download the free app today and find your next adventure.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
So, Christina Spohr writes, Bush, who considered himself an expert on China, was keen to bring Beijing into a trans-Pacific partnership. The importance of China is very clear to me, Bush told Brzezinski 2 weeks after his election. I'd love to return to China before Deng Xiaoping leaves office entirely. I feel I have a special relationship there. Deng Xiaoping was the mastermind of China's policies of reform and opening up, the drive after Mao Zedong's death in 1976 to abandon the autarkic planned economy and cautiously enter the global market. By 1989, the diminutive Deng Xiaoping was 84, and Bush was anxious to exploit their unusually long-standing personal relationship, which dated back to Bush's quasi-ambassadorship to China in 1974 to 75. For Bush, China meant Deng. The president's fascination with China had less to do with the country per se, its language, landscape, or culture, than with its social and economic potential that Deng was in the process of unleashing into the global capitalist economy. Conversely, the Chinese referred to Bush as Lao Pengyu, the term for a really trusted old friend, who is committed to building positive relations and acting as an interlocutor between the People's Republic of China and the wider world, but who also enjoys a special confidence that permits plain speaking. Those Americans before Bush who had earned such a distinction included Nixon and Kissinger, but neither Carter nor Reagan were seen as a Lao Pengyu. China's new course, promoted by Deng Xiaoping from 1978, was one of the transitional moments of the 20th century. Under his leadership, Beijing promoted rapid modernization through greater engagement in an increasingly interdependent world, particularly with technological advances in Western Europe and America. Domestically, measures were introduced to make policy more responsive to economic incentives. These included the decollectivization of agriculture, allowing farmers to make profits, rewards for especially efficient industrial performance, and the promotion of small-scale private business. With an eye on both the global economy and the international power balance, Deng gradually relaxed controls on foreign investment and trade and sought membership of global financial institutions. His stated aim was to accomplish by the end of the century a total socio-economic transformation of his country, which in the 1980s ranked amongst the poorest third of states in the world. By the time Bush was elected, President Deng's gamble was already paying off. In just over one decade, China's GDP more than doubled from 150 billion in 1978 to over 310 billion in 1988. The world's most populous country was in the throes of an economic revolution, which, unlike the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, was very tightly managed by the Chinese Communist Party, and which also advanced step by step. Not only did Gorbachev's economic liberalization begin much later in 1985 rather than 1978, but the concomitant political reforms, which gradually dismantled the Soviet Communist Party's monopoly on power, amounted to nothing less than a new system of governance. This process, in turn, stirred up destructive ethnic conflicts in what was a much less homogeneous society than China's. Whereas in the People's Republic of China, the process of economic reform was controlled from above, in the USSR, perestroika combined with glasnost would eventually undermine the Soviet state. In the course of this Chinese revolution, the United States played a major role. Although Deng Xiaoping was initially keen to engage with Western Europe, America represented his ultimate model, especially after his eye-opening visit in early 1979 to mark the opening of full diplomatic relations. What he saw in the United States was what he wanted for China in the future. During a week's whirlwind tour from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, America's factories and farms simply bowled him over. So impressive was US technology and productivity that by his own admission, Deng could not sleep for several weeks. There was just a kind of an amusing aside. During that visit, he's invited to the White House with President Carter to address and have a meal there where all sorts of figures are invited, one of whom was the actress Shirley MacLaine, a kind of advocate of various kind of liberal causes. And Shirley MacLaine sat next to Deng Xiaoping, and she'd been to do a documentary in China, probably got quite a naive one. And she said, "Yes, I like China. It was wonderful, a wonderful country. And when I went there, I discovered all these wonderful things that you do, and I discovered a physics professor who had gone back to the land, and he was working on the land, and it was re-educating him, and he was learning so much. And he said how grateful he was, and how wonderful it was, and how special it was." And Deng Xiaoping put down his knife and fork and just turned to her and said, "He was lying to you."
Out here, we feel things. The sore calves that lead to epic views, the cool waterfall mist during a hot hike, and the breeze that hits just right at the summit. But hey, don't just listen to us. Experience it for yourself. All Trails makes it easy to discover the best of the outdoors, with more than 450,000 trails around the world, points of interest along the trail, and offline maps for always-on navigation. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
And then also said afterwards, professors should be teaching in university. And obviously, he was talking about the Maoist era of kind of being sent to the countryside for re-education and that sort of thing, and the fact that the professor was probably too frightened, really, to tell Shirley MacLaine anything approaching the truth. But it's a great story because it shows you the kind of the naivety in certain parts of the Western world when it comes to authoritarian regimes that do things like this. The Carter administration was keen for Deng's reforms to succeed. It also wanted to pull China closer to the USA at a time when détente was eroding the relationship with Moscow. Eroding, and the relationship with Moscow had slipped into a deep freeze amid the new Cold War. Not only did Carter normalize diplomatic relations with China, but he also granted the most favored nation status 12 months later, a crucial precondition for expanded bilateral trade. The People's Republic of China joined the World Bank in April 1980, the same month that it took over from Taiwan. China's place at on the International Monetary Fund. Accelerating the momentum, in September 1980, the Carter administration concluded 4 commercial agreements on aviation, shipping, textiles, and expanded consular representation. Announcing these, Carter called the Sino-American relationship a new vital force for peace and stability in the international scene, which held a promise of ever-increasing benefits in trade and other exchanges for both countries. Reagan took up Carter's policy and pursued it with even greater vigor. One of the priorities of his new global strategy was the integration of the Pacific Rim into the world economy. Within that enlarged market, China was potentially the biggest player, so its successful opening up would offer exceptional opportunities for US trade and investment. There was also a strategic dimension. The drive for economic modernization would align China with the capitalist order and make it a more robust bulwark against the Soviet Union. In this vein, the Reagan administration offered Deng Xiaoping in 1981 a strategic association with the USA, effectively a de facto alliance. So at the time when the Cold War tensions ratcheted up, Sino-American security cooperation expanded. Beijing got weapons technology and whilst coordinating with the American anti-communist campaigns in Afghanistan, Angola, and Cambodia. Although Reagan himself visited China in 1984, he was happy to make as much use of as possible of his vice president's old friend status with the Chinese. Bush paid 2 long visits to Beijing in May 1982 and October 1985. On the second occasion, he was particularly bullish about the Sino-American trade. The sky's the limit, the door's wide open, he told a news conference, adding that he found much more openness now than 3 years before. Of course, continued progress depended on the paramount leader, now 81. Observers were keenly aware that in the interval between Bush's first and second trips to China, 3 gerontocrats had passed from the scene in the Kremlin. But Bush cheerfully told the press of Deng's words to him: "The vital organs of my body are functioning very well." The evolving Sino-American relationship was proving a win-win situation. In 1983, the Reagan administration had taken the crucial step of liberalizing Cold War controls on trade, technology, and investment, allowing the private sector to engage with China at minimal cost to the American taxpayer. Deng, for his part, was desperate to tap every kind of American know-how. Between 1982 and 1984, export licenses doubled, and sales of high-tech goods such as computers, semiconductors, hydro turbines, and equipment for the petrochemical industry rose 7-fold, from 144 million in 1982 to 1 billion in 1986. And this obviously prefigures this era of that comes along in the 1990s of outsourcing and offshoring manufacturing. And it's interesting to explore through Carter, Reagan, and Bush, the roots of this, and the fact that this economic relationship doesn't just spring from holes in the ground, and it has deep strategic meaning. I mean, it's to do with Cold War politics, and it's also to do with the idea that America had often had for over a century, that China was a great source of wealth that could be tapped, and things are very different now. So the relationship now will go through another great transformation, I predict, once the Trump tariff war on China has finally decisively failed. China hasn't gone anywhere and hasn't been defeated. America will need to dream up another approach, and one which doesn't come from a position of power. Anyway, I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Thanks very much, everybody. All the best. Bye-bye.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.